Today we are talking student loans, and I have a special guest that's going to be joining me today. We're going to be diving into student loans. We're going to be talking about some of the things that we can do to possibly not have that high student loan at the end of our college careers. We're going to talk about some of the things that are happening in the student loan landscape as it relates to rules that are being passed and how they impact borrowers. We're going to really dive into student loans. Hello, if this is your first time here, welcome. If you are returning, welcome back. In this space, we share practical tips, realistic strategies, and workable solutions that lead to financial freedom. So I want to bring my guest into the conversation right now. My guest is attorney Larita Baskerville. I hope I'm saying your name right. And she practices with the VA. And she also has her own private practice with her partner, her law partner, and the practice is called TXC Holdings LLC. And I will share her contact information as we go along. Larita, welcome to the Dr. Sev Talks Money.
Thanks for having me.
Show. All right, so we're going to dive right in because this student loan gorilla, it's a $1.7 trillion gorilla. And I am finding that from people I'm speaking with that it is stopping people from making life happen. It's stopping people from purchasing houses, stopping people from starting a family, so many things. And so I want to get your perspective on from your side of the fence, how you see this impacting graduates, this $1.7 trillion crisis in this country.
Right. Yeah. I mean, student loans, we could talk for days about student loans. Everybody, yes. Just about everybody I know had them, still has them, knows they're going to have to give them if they're going to go to college. So yeah, we have a lot to talk about. So I'm glad that you brought this topic up. We talk about it on my channel as well, TXC Tells All. So, and it's always the popular topic because it impacts so many people and negatively. Nobody says like, I'm glad I had student loans. It's negatively impacting people. So I'm glad that you decided to talk about that this week.
Yes. And one of the things that I see that is beneficial in it's what's has been recently changed is in terms of mortgage approval, because before for mortgages, they would look at 1% of your student loan, the balance. So for somebody who is, 300,000 to maybe 200, like, maybe a doctor who went to medical school, they're going to have that kind of loan unless they have somebody who can pay for that. And for them to look at 1% of their student loans, that kind of put them off from seeking a mortgage. So this new change where now you are looking at what you're actually paying, which makes sense. Instead of a 1% arbitrary number, it's what am I paying right now for my student loans?
Right.
And so that I can factor, I'm making $100,000. I'm paying $4,000 for student loans. I'm paying $3,000 for rent, whatever. I have an actual budget.
Right.
So I think that is very a positive change in the landscape of student loans.
I agree, because even when I got my mortgage for the house I'm in now, I remember they were calculating like, okay, what I can afford, and they were saying, okay, it's 1%. I'm like, well, I'm actually on the income-based repayment plan, so actually, you guys are giving me more of a debt than I actually have to pay each month when deciding whether I could actually afford this mortgage. And so then I had to produce all this paperwork to show like what I actually paid, convince them, like it was a whole big deal. So I'm glad that they moved in that direction, because there are different kind of repayment programs that people can go on that make their payments less than the 1%. And then that puts them in a better position for their debt to income ratio when they're trying to decide whether you can afford the mortgage. So I'm glad they're moving in that direction, because it could basically disqualify a lot of people previously.
Yes. Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, it's common sense.
Right.
Why come up with an arbitrary number when you have what you're actually paying? Right. And you can use that as a basis to determine what is your monthly expense.
Right.
Instead of an arbitrary number.
Right.
So I know that I still have student loans,
Mhm.
and it's it's impacted the way I look at things. I actually got my first student loan at the age of 51.
Okay.
Because I didn't have student loan for undergrad or for my master's. I had scholarship for undergrad. I had
Okay.
my master's was covered by my company, but
Okay.
for my doctorate, which is another story that's going in my book,
Right.
the company really should have given me a stipend, but anyway, let me not
Right.
say what I was going to say. But so I know student loans, and for me, it stifles my freedom, the freedom of choice.
Yeah.
Is what it does for me. So talk to me a little bit about, from your side and what you've seen, how has student loan impacted your personal finance journey?
Yes, it's impacted me negatively in the sense that I have to think about it. Whereas you said, like, I had some undergrad loan, but the bulk of my loan came from law school, and not even from law school, like the tuition from living, because I didn't work during law school. And so now I'm dealing with these law school basic student loans that I had from. So I'm just like, okay, well, when I'm considering things I want to do in the future, it doesn't necessarily, it's not that I don't have money to pay it, but it does mean I have less money to do other things that I would like to do. And so I think some people are faced with that. So I'm grateful that I can make the payments and still do, have a house and other things. But that's a lot less money that I have to kind of, go on vacation with my family or enjoy certain things or put towards a business or investments. And so I think about that. But I also am not tone deaf. I know that there's some people that really can't afford to make the payments. And when this whole thing comes back in October, they're going to be really in a dire situation. So I'm well aware that I'm blessed enough to be able to technically afford it, but I'm also in a position where I'm like, okay, how are we going to, like you said, this big gorilla, how are we going to tackle it so it's not so overwhelming?
Yeah. And, it's, to me, there are people who are worried about their student loans paying it back. And there are some people who don't care.
Right. They like, it's always gonna be there.
It's because I had a friend, we still have a friend who she thinks that way about credit cards. She just charges it up. She doesn't care. Okay. But I hate debt. So I'm trying to pay. And really, to that end, I think the issue is not so much the student loans as it is the structure of the system. Because we are told we need to go and get higher education in order to move forward.
Right.
We are told that in order to compete in corporate America, in this landscape, we need to get higher education.
Right.
But then higher education is pretty much unaffordable for a lot of us.
Right.
And for people of color, especially women, we are typically more educated than the average populace.
Okay.
And we have economic barriers, class barriers that we have to go through, and we tend to carry more student loan debt. Because if you look at our past, our parents were the ones who were the clerks. They were the janitors. They were not the vice presidents or the presidents of companies that had the money to help their kids. And so you have this perpetuating cycle where you're going to school, you're trying to get more student loans to further your education, you're going into debt, trying to pay that off, and then your kids, you can't help your kids, so they get student loans. And there are a few of us who break through that cycle. Yes, I agree. But for the most part, those are some of the things that are keeping us, I think, from being free to make decisions that can best serve our families. So tell me, what do you think about that kind of discussion as it relates to people of color?
Well, that's interesting. I didn't know some of the things, so I'm learning them because, you're the expert on talking money. So I'm like, I didn't know. I mean, growing up in my family, a lot of my family was coming from a blue collar worker family, and they didn't go and get higher education. And so I know that it was viewed as like maybe kind of out of reach, or maybe it wasn't required for certain people, especially for the women. Like, some of them were just like, okay, find yourself a husband that's going to take care of you, kind of the old school way. And I know even my grandmother, she never worked outside the home, but she was kind of living through me because she was so proud of me that I kind of went and furthered my education. And yes, I eventually did get married and have children, but she knew that was a choice that she did not make. And she, she started in school, but then she she didn't finish because she had kids. And so to make that, her having to make that decision, like finish school or take care of my children, I'm glad that personally I wasn't in that position where I had to make that choice, that I was able to finish my education. But I know, it does affect certain, I guess, races. And I also think that sometimes, like you said, you don't have the money, I guess, to fund your children to go to school, so then that puts them in a position to have to do it. And so I think maybe also just educating people about what's available. I know you mentioned that you had scholarships. I didn't really know about how to like apply for scholarships. I know there's a lot of opportunities out there, but people don't have the knowledge about where to get the information about free money, that they end up putting themselves in debt. And perhaps they could have gotten a scholarship. There could be merit-based ones or income-based ones, and maybe they don't have the resources. And that could be part of the problem as well. Like, we don't know there's free money out there. Even if I don't have if my family didn't have that old money, there might be some free money out there for you, and you may not even know about it. So I think it's good that you talk to people about money and ways that you can kind of get a hold on your personal finances.
Yeah, I had a friend, because when I came here, I came from Jamaica, and I was already 29 years old. So I started over the educational system. And it was a friend who was an American, and she knew the process. And she said, based on your grades, you need to apply. And she actually took me, and she did push me to do all the things I needed to do to make sure. There was one class, I think I got a grade, I think it was a calculus, and I was sick, so I didn't do really well. And I think I had a C, and she had the teacher move me up to a B because of prior performance, because she said, you're good at math, you shouldn't have a B. So I didn't know all of these things.
That's a good friend.
Yes, I didn't know how the system worked. And for me, we have this confirmation bias where we think, if I go to law school, I am going to make six figures right out the bat, right? And so no matter what information people share with us, the confirmation bias, we twist it to say, I'm going to do well. And that was my thing, because I thought, if I get a doctorate, and with all my experience and all my degrees, then when I get my doctorate, I'm going to be able to command a higher salary. And of course, that didn't work. So, that didn't quite work. I had to actually move from the job I was at for so many years. And the only reason I was there that long is because of my supervisor, because I love him, still love him. But I had to move away from there to command what I thought I deserved. And I want to share the statistics with anybody who's listening. Women make overall 82 cents for every dollar a white man makes. Black women earn an average of 62 cents for every dollar a white man makes. Hispanic and Latino make 54 cents. Asian, 90 cents. American Indian and Alaska Native, 57 cents. So we're working for the same company, and we are trying to buy a house. We're buying a car, we're doing all the things, clothing our family, feeding our family, putting it into the school. But you're making $1, and I am making, on average, Black women 62 cents. And we're competing for the same houses, the same cars. So we always seem to be falling behind. And the same thing applies with student loans, where we always seem to be falling behind. And yes, I do know that people break through, but that's one of the reasons I think the system needs to be reformed. Not student loans so much, but the way our higher education system is set up needs to be reformed. I doubt it's going to happen, because the people who manage it are the ones who making the buku money, and they're the ones making the decision. So
what kind of changes though are you trying to look for in the system? Like,
I am looking
for tuition,
in terms of tuition, in terms of, if I do really well as a Black person, how do I compete with no money? I have no money for school. How do I compete with the white guy whose dad is fraternity, was big into fraternity, who is the president of whatever club? And I'm actually
that goes deep. That's systemic right there.
Yes, because that's who you're competing with. You're competing with those, and so you always seem to be trying to catch up. You're playing catch up in so many ways, economically, systemically. I could go on, but the point I'm trying to make is that I don't know what the answer is, in total, but I do think we need to reform the system. we really need to reform the way we look at higher ed in this country, because the way it is set up right now, people of color who are usually lower earning are always going to seem to take on debt to get through school. And yes, I agree you should start with community college, because I started with community college.
Yeah. I wish I would have done that.
Yeah, I started with a community college, and nobody asked me where you started. They asked me, oh, what are you? Oh, you have a doctorate? Okay. So that's what they look at. They don't look at where you start. So I encourage my daughter, even though she got admitted to Georgia State, I encourage her to go to the community college, to start there, because it's going to save you some money. So that's one thing.
Okay.
I think we can do. But do you have any other ideas or suggestion that you think people can use to maybe save some money in terms of college, apart from working?
Right. I would say, I mean, if I had to do things differently, like you mentioned, community college, my mother actually worked for community college, so I definitely should have went there because it was free. But I was like, I'll just go to this state institution, which wasn't a lot of money, but it wasn't a lot of money, but then you can't compete with free, right? So I should have probably did that for 2 years and then transferred to the state institution as my undergrad. But I know personally, like when I got to the graduate level, because I know I usually give people this advice, like if you're going for graduate level, especially, don't go to an expensive college. Like that is like the worst advice ever. Like I tell my cousins who are younger than me, like if you know you want to go further than undergrad, do not spend a whole bunch of money on undergrad. Don't spend a whole bunch of money on undergrad.
Right.
So I would say to do that just for looking forward in your life. And I know a lot of times now bachelor's degrees are like equivalent to associate's degree. Like at this point, the minimum level to kind of get in the door is crazy. And so you want to kind of think about that when you're planning out, like, what can I afford? I also did work during undergrad, and I did like work study during law school. And that's still like, it supplemented things, but it was stressful too. Like trying to balance working and trying to focus on your studies. It's challenging. It did build a lot of character. I'm not going to say
yeah,
it built a lot of character, right? But I mean, if I had the choice, maybe I wouldn't have wanted to do it. But I know in law school, when I knew that we were supposed to get out of law school, you know how you have, even when you graduate from school, you have 6 months, I guess, of forbearance or whatever it is, before they make you start paying. And I wish I would have known that they were repayment programs, because I kind of just like deferred it, because I'm like, I can't afford this payment. And I probably could have been making some payments along the way, even with my work study money, because paying off a certain income and I wasn't making a lot, the payments would have been counting towards my ultimate goal. And I just kind of just didn't pay anything. So if I had to go back in time, that's what I would have done. Like use whatever the little money I had and told them like, this is what I make, and had it based on my income. So that's one. I don't know that is out there, because I didn't know that until later on.
That's one of the things I wish I had done too, is pay on my student loans while I was in school, because when you pay on your student loans, it's paying down that interest. Because I read the papers, but I really, when you get a stack of paper, you're not reading through all that stuff in the fine print. And what happens is when you graduate, all that interest, if you have the student loans where interest is accumulating while you're in school, all that interest is added on to your loan, and that becomes your base. So you've already, let's say you have $100,000 in student loan, and you were assessed 10%. At the end of your forbearance, the six-month period when you're done with school, all of that interest that accrued is added on to that 100,000. So now they're accruing interest on that 100 and whatever the amount is. So you're paying interest on top of interest. To me, that is highway robbery. This is a government you're dealing with. Why do you have the need to charge people interest on top of interest? That makes no sense. And what you are there, it's not like they are providing. You can tell this is my soapbox issue, right?
I get
it. But it's not like you are saying, okay, when you leave school, you're guaranteed a job. You're guaranteed a job that's comparative to the educational level that you have. It's not like they're providing that or even making any kind of concession around that. So why are you putting that burden on people? And then you're saying, okay, now you've graduated. I need you to stimulate the economy. I need you to spend money. What money? You're barely paying us. And
what money?
I think this kind of went off the rails because I had some other things I wanted to talk about.
Please like, stop charging me money. This is a capitalist society, though. I get it. Like, in a capitalistic society, you're gonna have people that are gonna make more than others. I get it. Like everybody, somebody was saying, I was reading some article, was like everybody, if you make college free, everybody will have a degree. No, they won't, because everybody doesn't go to college, right? College is not for everybody. I'm well aware of that. And it can still balance out this whole capitalistic society where everybody can't be in the top 1%. I get it. Everybody's not gonna want it, right? Yes. So it's for that argument for them to say that, oh, that's the reason why, because everybody will just get a degree and the degrees be worth nothing. I think there's a lot of holes to be poked into that argument, because there are people that need to make, like, blue collar workers. That people are going to always want to have that position. Like out here in Houston, Texas, HVAC technicians are like,
they probably make you more than anyone else.
Everybody needs air conditioning out here in Texas. We are hot. Yeah. So like there is always going to be a need for those particular workers. So even if you make college free, it's not going to impact the fact that everybody's going to change their mind and not do what they perhaps would have done anyway. You might have some people that would come over from the blue collar worker side, but not everybody. Not enough to like ruin this capitalistic society that you're trying to maintain.
Yes, and even with the company that I worked for, they paid for you to go to school, undergrad and masters. They paid for my masters. Of course, I wasn't working with them at the time when I did undergrad. They paid for it, and the percentage of people who took advantage of that, very low. And they were paying full ride. You paid as long as you made, I think it was up to a C. They paid everything,
right,
including books. So there are a lot of people who didn't take advantage of that. It's just like a 401k. Company is saying, if you give 2%, I'm going to give you 2%. So if that was $200 that you're putting into your retirement, that means immediately you have $400.
I didn't know about that when I was younger either. So it's about like what you don't know. If you don't know, then you kind of miss out on free money. Like you said, like people could have had their undergrads, like if they don't know though, like, and that's why when my school, my job had something similar to that, but it wasn't for, I think it was up to a certain amount of credits. So maybe like 10 credits. They would reimburse you for, and you get to somehow prove how like related to your job. You're like, oh, this is business. It relates to something, right? So I would tell people about it. I'm like, you can get money, like you can get reimbursed. And then some people were like too lazy to do the paperwork for it. I'm like, I'm going to do this paperwork. Like some people knew and then didn't want to do the paperwork. Some people just didn't know at all. But like you said, even with the 401k, I didn't know about it until somebody told me like, you need to be doing this because like this is when I was in like my late teens, early 20s. I didn't know about it. So like they were helping me out. I'm like, how did I miss out on this free money? I could have been started. I've been at this job for how long now? Like, and I'm just learning about it. So it's a really, and it was before YouTube days, right? So it's like, okay, what you don't know.
Unfortunately, a lot of people know about it and they still don't do it, because I've been having a conversation with a coworker and she asked, what was that thing you told me about again? I said, a 401k, the company matches up to 3%. Oh, and I'll have a conversation maybe 3 months, 4 months later. What was that thing? I still need to do that thing. And so it's, what is your priority, right? I always say, I think of my 80-year-old self. When I'm 80 years old, I want to be on the beach somewhere, shriveled up as I'm going to be. I want to be able to enjoy my life. I want to balance it now because I want to enjoy it now. But when I'm retired, I don't want to be scrambling and having to work into 80 years old. I happen to love what I do. I love this. I'll do it until I can't do it anymore. Education of personal finance, that's my jam. So I will do it no matter what. I'll do it for free. Not too many times, but I'll do it for free because I love doing that. I love educating. I love sharing the knowledge. But at the same time, I want to be sure that if I were to get sick, if something were to happen to my car and I'm not getting a 9 to salary from a 9 to 5, that I have something in reserve to be able to take care of my business. And to that point, you don't even have to make 6 figures to be able to save. There are so many stories of janitors who have, or people who are what we consider lower level jobs that they were able to, when they died, they left money in scholarships for people. Because they knew how to balance it. That's what it's about. It's balancing. But then again, because of the burden of student loans, it makes it difficult to really do that balancing. Because they didn't have student loans. They probably were making less, but they didn't have the burden of student loans. And so that's not an additional issue that they had to deal with.
Right. Yeah. It balances out too. And I think that's a good point that you make about it. Like, I think oftentimes, like, I notice it myself, I make more, I spend more. So it's like, I should have money left over, right? But I'm like, oh, now I got this pot to work with. Like, no, you should pretend like you have that lower pot that you previously lived just fine off of and lived off of that, instead of like, oh, now I can afford this car, or now I can afford this house. And I think a lot of people get caught in that. And like you said, somebody who made less money, if they, they worked off of that and put money aside, if they made savings a priority, then they were able to make that work and other things. So it just depends on your mindset too. Like, how do you think about personal finance?
And that's one of the biggest thing I teach is money mindset, because that, I call it lifestyle creep, because you're making more. As you make more, our minds tell us that we're entitled to show that we're making more by the way we live.
Right.
And so and that's why a lot of people, when they got caught in the layoff in 2008, a lot of things tumbled down because they were living their best lives, which is fine. But at the same time, you always have to put some in reserve.
Right.
And you don't want to live your best life so much that when the repo man comes, putting away your car, you're trying to compete with the Joneses, trying to live up to whatever, then your car being, which one do you want to be? Do you want to be ashamed to not compete and live in the same big houses and the same nice car? Or do you want to be ashamed for them to come repo that stuff? And so that's how I look at it. It's like,
I know Judy on her channel, she talks about when I was looking for cars. She's like, I like my Toyota Corolla. Like, I would ride it. Like, don't buy a new. Like, she's an advocate for always like, don't try to keep up with the Joneses, especially with the cars. In particular, she was talking about cars, and she was like, I don't need a big fancy car to like prove nothing to nobody. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's really about balance if you think about it, because the people that we think are going to be impressed by the things that we have and the things we're driving, the house we live in, the people we think are going to be impressed by that, they don't really care.
Right.
They're looking and they're probably jealous. They're probably, I'm jealous of Mr. Brown and Mr. Brown is jealous of me.
Right. Right, like stop the cycle.
Yeah, we really have to stop the cycle. And people will talk about you because they talk about me because of where I live and how much I make, based on what I'm making, they think I should be, in the big house and whatever, but hey, that's okay because you don't pay my bills.
Right, exactly.
Oh my God. All right. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about was as part of the American Rescue Plan, President Biden announced that loans that have been forgiven will not count as income. So what is your take on this, on this?
So are you talking about the public service loan forgiveness ones, or just different, the ones he's talking about forgiving for other people?
It used to be just public service, with teachers, with firefighters and all of that. It used to be just that.
Okay.
But with his plan that he signed, I think it was March of 2021, now all loans that are forgiven, they will be able to, they will not have to take it as income. Because if you think about it, if you had let's say a $20,000 loan and you were forgiven and you're in the 20% bracket, immediately that's a $4,000 tax bill. Somebody who is $100,000 loan, if they're in the 20% bracket, that's a $40,000 tax bill, and it's due the next year. So if it's forgiven this year, then the tax bill comes the following year. So now he's saying that doesn't have to be counted as income.
That's good. I mean, I was always under the impression or on the fence of like, okay, if I had 100,000 in student loans and you forgave that, and I got a tax bill for let's say 20,000, I'm still don't got to pay it at 80,000. So I'm okay with it. I would just have to budget to figure it out. But the fact that he's giving like people not the, having to claim it on the taxes, that's even better. But I was always under like, I'll pay the taxes because the taxes pale in comparison to what I really owed. So, but I'm glad he's doing that. So that's going to be helpful to a lot of people. Because a lot of people probably didn't even think about budgeting for the tax bill they was going to get the next year either. So that kind of helps them out because it doesn't put them in a different kind of hole. It would be a different kind of hole for other people. And IRS always gets their money. So whereas like whereas before you're like, they like, okay, you don't get your refund for the next 15 years. You're like, what
the rest of your life?
So I mean, I'm glad that he expanded it to reach more people. So yeah,
I'm actually going to the next Sunday. The gentleman that's going to be joining me. We're going to be talking strictly about public service loan forgiveness. He was forgiven. He's a lawyer.
Oh,
and
yeah, I need to talk to him.
Yeah, he was forgiven for nearly $300,000 in student loans. But he had a plan. He did everything right, because I have a video on my channel here about public service loan forgiveness, and not all government entities qualify. People think that, oh, if I just work for the government, then I qualify, but not all government entities qualify for you to get student loan forgiveness under the PSLF program. And some
that's
people
gonna be a good one. Y'all should watch that, because we got a video on our channel too. But I'm talking about, like, they said that less than 5% of people actually got approved for it. And it was like, but then people were like not doing all the requirements like on the checklist. And that's why I kind of go through, like, are you making sure you do all these things? Because maybe that could be the reason why you weren't forgiven. So I'm glad that you're going to talk about that, because, you know, they have programs out there, but you still have to make sure you meet the criteria. And hopefully they don't keep changing the criteria either. Like, that'd be bad to kind of change the finish.
Yeah, it's more than just, I'm working for the government, so I'm good. There are a lot of other things. You have to make sure you're recertified every year. I mean, it's just a lot of things that people, well, it's not a lot, but there's just some specific things that you have to do to meet the criteria. And then again, the program is a little bit screwed up. So here it is, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. The program is screwed up. So you have two colossal errors or colossal mistakes, and you never get any solutions. But he shared with me some of the things he did, and he actually has a book that he wrote about getting forgiven for the public service loan forgiveness. It's too late for me to do all of that.
Really?
Yeah, because I'm not working in an organization that would qualify. And by the time if I decided I was going to do that and work with an organization that qualifies, I would probably be in my 90s.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm glad that he's helping, like, let people know that what's out there. And so maybe even like Biden, when they decide whether they're going to actually do this loan forgiveness, what they say, $10,000 or $30,000, they keep throwing out different numbers, whatever it is, that might be helpful for those that are still paying you if they can't qualify for a regular program.
And I know my video today, a lot of people are probably not going to like, because I'm going to touch on some toes and I'm going to talk about some hot button stuff. But here are my thoughts on that. Just like with the drug epidemic, it did not become a priority with Congress until white suburbans were affected. It did not become a priority for them to pass the laws and to do what they needed to do to take care of the drug epidemic. They brought the drugs into the Black communities. The Black communities are being decimated by it. They did not care. When white suburban communities were starting to be significantly impacted, that's when they made a move. I think the same thing with student loans. Until this student loan impacts more whites than it does people of color, Blacks, Latinos, Indians, Alaskan Indian, until it impacts those groups, the white folks, more than it impacts people of color, they're not going to do anything. They're going to talk around it. They're going to talk about it. And I'm not, this is my opinion, but it's based on historical precedent. The things that have happened in the past, where they don't make a move until it impacts significantly white populations. If it impacts Black and brown people, so be it. Let's put a little Band-Aid on. And that's what I think is happening with student loans. So even though they're talking about the 10,000, Biden ran based on the fact that he's going to look at student loans. But when you look at all the things that he's passed, student loans were never part of the plan. Student loans were not part of his line items. And of course, Schumer and can't think of her name right now.
Pelosi?
No, the Elizabeth Warren. They're pushing for 50,000. So the conversation now is, should Biden do this with a stroke of the pen? Does he have the authority, or should they go through Congress? And he is saying, and his people are saying, this needs to be a congressional action. And Warren and Schumer is saying, no, you can do that with the stroke of a pen. So whatever the right answer is, I don't know. But I do know that there are a lot of people who would have a lot of relief from getting the student loan forgiven. But again, I don't think that's the fix though.
Mm-hmm.
We can fix, it's like going to the doctor and they give you a tablet for your headache. But what's causing the headache?
Right.
That's what needs to be fixed.
Right. I agree. I think that's kind of like when I decided I wanted to go to law school, I was like, based off of me wanting to help people growing up in the, my dad was a foster parent. I'm like, I see all these people getting help. And I was like, okay, I don't want to just help. Like fostering is helpful, right? But I'm like, we need to address the problem of how these kids got into the system. I'm more like that. Like that is the ultimate thing. So the same thing as you saying, like, yeah, you can help people with the student loan problem, but what's the overarching reason why we've gotten to this situation? I think so. I agree with you on that. As far as like whether they're gonna do something about it before it hits like white suburbia, I don't know. But that is a good point about like the war on drugs and how it didn't become a priority until it started to affect people. So that's time will tell, whether you're right or not, but that's a good observation.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really sad. And for a lot of people now who are thinking, especially with the COVID-19 and the fact that people are losing their jobs, people always think, okay, higher education is going to help me. And unfortunately, again, going back to confirmation bias, we think that's the fix because everything we read says if we get the higher education, we are going to get the better job. And that it doesn't follow. One doesn't follow the other. And so people are going back to school because they're thinking that's a fix. And unfortunately, it may not be. Right. So yes.
Yeah, I agree. I think like I said, out here, if you HVACs out here make 6 figures. You just need technical school for that. Like it doesn't even take a whole year. So I'm just you don't have to necessarily. Yes, it's different kinds of education. You may not have to get into the college education that you were taught probably from when you were little in school. You may not need that kind of education to live a decent lifestyle that you think, and so that may not be the solution for everybody. Now, for certain professions, obviously, like you still need to go to medical school to become a doctor.
Yes,
right. Certain things that you can't get around that, but there are other positions that you can possibly get jobs and that you don't need to go into debt to make decent money.
Right. I agree. I mean, even teachers, I look at how teachers are underpaid and we need teachers.
Right.
We need them. It's not like we can say, okay, we probably, maybe we can need some teachers. We need teachers.
Right.
But they're underserved, undervalued, underpaid. But they need to go to school.
Right.
To get the basics. We need principals who are higher educated than just the norm to be able to manage your schools, manage your district. What kind of help are we giving them? Yeah, we do the public service loan forgiveness. They're required to do so much, but why would they need to do that? You're telling me you need to get loans of up to $50,000 or $60,000 and spend 10 years teaching underpaid in this category so that at the end of 10 or 15 years, I'm going to forgive you this amount. Oh, by the way, whatever I forgive, I'm going to tax you. So, something is wrong with that process.
Yeah.
Because yes, they need to go to school. Right. And so if you have somebody who maybe one of the things to look at is if you have somebody who is going to school to be a teacher, then you say, this is what you're going to get as your stipend or whatever it is to be able to finish your teaching job. And then you're required to teach maybe 5 years.
Right.
Because then you pay up front. So you're not giving them the stress of having to go through school. Then because you can't make up for that money that you didn't make.
Right. The loss.
And I'm an example of it. And I'll share my story in a little bit. You can't make up for that money that you've been underpaid all those years. So you're going to be in that profession underpaid, and then you have all those other things that you have to do. So why not upfront? We require teachers. If you come into this program, this is what we're going to do for you, so that you can be the teacher, and you can, we require you to stay maybe 5 years.
Right.
And I know
you should be in policy. Do you think in policy?
Yes.
Education, that's part of like how it starts. Like the people who are what is it called? The people who basically get paid to go to Congress to advocate on behalf of
Oh,
companies.
yeah, I know what you're talking about.
The word is skippy. I have a brain freeze right now. But those people, those in policy, those
lobbyists.
We say
lobbyists,
right? They make a lot of money, right? Because they're going to Congress to say this should be happening. They're getting paid a lot of money for their companies to do that. And so having somebody like you said who lobbies for teachers to say this is what you guys should devote a certain amount of money to teachers' colleges. Let's say people want to go to college, then they won't have to have the money spent up front and be, let's say, reimbursed in the back end. They don't have to have stress to worry about it. That's something. And lobbying is a big business for a reason, right? Money, wherever money is, how Congress doles out money is always going to be a big business. How they spend the money, what Congress thinks is important over other things. Working for the VA always gets money because they don't want to mess with veterans. They don't want to appear to be like, oh, this is we're affecting people who put their lives on the line. They always give money to VA. Certain other things like money talks. You get lobbyists to talk loud enough, you get more money for your particular cause.
Yeah, so it's whichever lobbyist speaks more, whose voice is louder, whether it's by money, because now they have laws where you can't really pay them directly, but there are ways to pay them.
Right,
okay?
Exactly.
Ooh, the system is a mess. Right. So there are ways to pay them. So whichever one has the bigger influence, because you have the Teachers Association. What are they doing? What is their goal? What is their interest? Are they really lobbying for students, for teachers, or are they lobbying for, to keep their status as the teachers union rather than to help their people? I mean, there's so many competing interests.
Right. It's so many layers to this. Like, who's really looking out for people? Like, nobody. You can't tell sometimes.
Yes. I have a friend who, after 20 plus years working with a DA office in a city, I'm not going to say what the city is, and a new DA came in after that many years, and he promised that he was not going to do what the old DA did, which is keep certain number of people, certain people in and bring in the cronies and whatever. He got rid of all the people with experience, brought in his people, and the ones he promoted, their skin color didn't look like me. And he said that's what the old DA was doing. So he actually happened to be black, and he brought in his people, and he did the exact same thing that he said his crony was his opponent was doing. But anyway, my story that I wanted to share about, being underpaid and undervalued is that I work with a company for a number of years, and one time, maybe like 10 years before I left, I saw a tax return on the printer for my then manager. 10 years later, I was in a similar role, and I was being paid just about what she was getting 10 years before. Okay. And so it happened to be my director who fought for me to even get what the raise that I did get when I was promoted. And they hired an external company to evaluate salaries. And I was one of those that identified that were underpaid. And then they had the termicity to try to pay me, I think it was like 12% or something. I'm like, no, that's not enough. So I was out of there. So, when I'm talking about being underpaid and all of that, I'm not saying out of the top of my head. I'm talking about what I know, and I'm not the only one. Right. So this is a deeply embedded system. This is a problem where if I am an engineer with 10 years of experience and I'm black, and I have a counterpart who is an engineer and white and 10 years of experience, there is no freaking way that we should get different salaries. Right. We should get the same salary. Why are we getting different salaries? Why is he automatically getting more money than the black one? That makes no sense. But anyway,
I think that happens more in the private sector than the government sector too, because in the government sector we have certain like grade levels or levels. So you it can still be impacted by it because you can kind of not get promoted to the next grade or whatever. That's the way that you can possibly come in at the same time as somebody else and be paid less. But usually like your salary is public, whereas in the private sector, I think it's more private and people kind of are more secretive about what they make, and it's not widely known, which basically perpetuates like the somebody can make more than somebody else in that field because nobody kind of knows, and you can kind of get lowball.
And they want you to keep it private. They don't want you to share. They don't want you to share because then they can play their games.
Right.
And Judy here was saying I could have complained to the EEOC, but I didn't even think about that at the time. And I wish I had, because it just was not fair.
Why did they even do that? That was crazy though. What prompted them to do the audit anyway? Because that seems like that was following somebody else doing the EEOC complaint, like for them.
I don't know what prompted them, but I'm thinking that because since I was with the company, we had like 3 different mergers, and maybe with every people from different companies. When they did the first merger with the 2 companies, they didn't do that. And I do know that I had some people who were in a different state that was making a lot more than me. Didn't even have the basic education. Okay. And then when this third company accrued us, acquired. I'm talking accounting, acquired us. I think that's when they decided they had to look at all the parameters and make sure that we're all in the level playing field. But it's just very aggravating, very it's very emotional trying to know that you may be more educated than your counterparts, have more experience, but you have to be fighting for $1. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I agree.
But anyway, I jumped all over the place. I had a flow that I was going to do. But that's it. All over the place. I don't even know where I am now. Yeah, but give us some, maybe some pointers based on your experience, some things that maybe people should consider before heading towards student loans. And I do know that on your channel, you have some information about student loans and information of law school, because that's your experience. So let me just go ahead and quickly put her information up here. Her YouTube is TXC Tells All. And right now she's at 900 plus subscribers. So please go over there and bring her up. Let's get her to 1,000. And your Instagram is TXC Holdings LLC. If you want to follow her and her law partner over there. So yeah, give us some information, some wrap up, some pointers that you think would be helpful outside of me ranting and raving all through the thing.
I think we talked about a lot of different things, like what impacts why we're having this conversation to begin with. And I know, I think this title was like the student loan crisis, what I wish I knew. And so I think there's certain things that I maybe could have done differently. Sometimes people say no regrets. I mean, I think I can still say that I wish I did some things differently. It's all part of the journey. I would say that I went to law school, and I know people who are going to graduate. This is for people who go into graduate degree in particular, not necessarily undergrad, because usually in undergrad you live on campus, but when you do graduate, it doesn't necessarily have on-campus housing all the time. In law school, you get a bulk of money for living expenses and tuition, but they just basically give these financial aid package. Don't tell you that, okay, don't have to necessarily take all of it, and that you probably should be a little bit more mindful about how you spend it. And I went to school in DC, which is very expensive to live at. And now that I think back on it, I probably could have lived in a not as nice apartment for the sake of now. I'm still paying for that apartment now. The money that I was given to kind of supplement me to live off of through my 3 years of law school, I probably could have not had such nice digs, and I would have had some of the money, some of the debt I'm paying now. And so I think back on that, and I know that applies to more graduate level people, but nowadays a lot of people are going for that graduate degree level, so that could be applicable to other people who are pursuing that. Think about it, because they just say sign on the dotted line, you'll get this money, it'll be wired into your account, and then you kind of like do what you need to do with it for the next, they usually say 9 months, but I usually tell people, make sure that works out for you for 12 months, because that will basically mean less that you have to take out in student loans. If you make that, whatever that financial aid package is, make it last for 12 months versus the 9 months that they tell you it has to last for. Also, because sometimes the gap between starting a new school year, the financial aid package may not kick in, but your rent is still going to be due. So if you've only budgeted for 9 months and then you're waiting for them to give you the money for the summer or whatever the month is, and you don't have it, that's not a good look. So you might want to budget more than just the 9 months, but just to think about like how that impacts you. And maybe get a roommate, or if you don't want a roommate, get a less expensive place to live. If you can live with family members and pay them some money, but not that's going to be nearly as much as it would cost to live by yourself, do that, because in the long run, like Dr. Seth said, you're going to be paying interest on interest. So you want to think about how much interest you're going to be paying on interest when you get out. And if you can kind of be mindful and not take out the maximum that they allow you to, because just because they say you can afford it don't mean you really can. So
yes, that's a great point, because I've been trying to school my daughter on that. When she gets the student loans, she gets a small amount of student lones because she doesn't qualify. They say I make too much.
That's a whole nother story right there, right?
Yeah, so she has a small student loan that she gets, and so I show her how to make sure she pays now, so when it doesn't accumulate any interest. And even though it's not, I mean, it's like $1 something in interest you pay, right. But I'm like, don't do that, because and going back to advice for people who may be listening who are considering school, I paid $400 and something, nearly $500 for my daughter for a scholarship coach, and she gave her all the information, but did my daughter do anything? I had to stay on top of her, and she didn't do what she was supposed to. Yeah, so she ends up having to go, and she did get some scholarships because her scores were decent. She got some scholarships, but they were at a private school. So by the time she got this $20,000-$30,000 scholarship, and then what she was going to pay for for school and out of state and all that stuff, it didn't make sense. So I just said, just come on back.
Right.
Community college. Okay. Right. Yeah, so that's a good point. And another point you made was about making sure that you're not for when you get your money, you're not spending all of it. So send back whatever you're not making. People go on vacation with their student loan money because they don't realize that vacation, you've forgotten about it. 20 years from now, you don't even remember what that extra money was, and you're paying interest on top of interest on top of interest on top of interest on that. And there are different things that you can do to structure your student loans when you do come out of school in a way that you're paying all of the interest, so that when it's time to recertify, you're not having interest left in your account to be rolled over and to be added to be capitalized and added to your current balance. So there are different things that they can do, and I don't know if if you handle student loans or anything like that, but they can certainly, if they have any questions, they can contact you. But I do know that for me, they can go to my website,
go to your website. I don't have anything.
Okay. Yeah, go to SevTalksMoney.com and make an appointment, and we can look at your student loans. I have a Pick Your Brain where I just talk in general, but then I also have a discovery session where you're putting all your numbers in there, and I'm going to do the analysis, and I'm going to give you some ideas. And then if you really want to work with me, then you have to come back for the other session, which is when I will give you a plan as to how to attack your debt. Okay. But this student loan is really, it's really something that needs to be addressed. Another thing I didn't talk about that I want to touch on a little bit is consolidating our student loans. Like for me, I advise against consolidating federal because of the benefits and the things that you get. You have to be very careful about consolidating federal, but for private loans, yes, go ahead, because you want the lower interest rate. The only time I say to consolidate federal is if the rates are so high that it makes sense to consolidate to get a lower rate, and you're still in a program where if the government comes up with any kind of relief, that you will still qualify. You don't want to.
That's a good point. I had to do that for mine because I'm glad I realized it early on, but I realized these are all federally backed loans, but they were in a certain different kind of program, and I had to basically consolidate it to a program that qualified for the public student loan forgiveness. Otherwise, all these payments I'm thinking I'm making as counting scores that they weren't. So I lost 10 payments, which is not a lot in the overall scheme. But think about it, if I hadn't known about it till I got to my 120th payment and realized I was making payments on loans that didn't qualify, I'd have been pissed. Because a lot of those bulk of them were from a loan both of them for the loans that didn't qualify. So I'm glad that I realized it. So I'm like 10 payments off from those, but I did consolidate within the federal student loan realm because a couple of them did not qualify. So I think that's a good point.
Yes, that is so very key. And so, I would say to anybody who, if you got to this part, got over all my ranting and got to this part of the video, then I would say to you, ask questions and ask questions and ask questions and ask questions. The people that are servicing your loan are there to serve you. Don't be afraid to call and ask them questions. Ask your if you're still in college, go talk to your counselors, talk to them. They are there to serve you. You are paying them to serve you. So ask questions until you get an answer that makes sense to you. If you don't understand something, ask them, what does that mean? What does that mean for me? How does that impact me? Ask the questions, because you, again, are paying for that service. I have to keep telling my daughter, I'm like, those teachers, you're paying for them. Don't be afraid to ask them. If they're not answering your question, go to a higher authority, because you're paying tuition to get the service. And if you're not getting the service, and if you don't understand the service that you're getting, ask the questions.
And I would say too, as a lawyer, I always say get stuff in writing so that you don't have to say, I talked to such and such representative and they told me this, and somebody said, can you send me confirmation of that via email or through their, they have internal messaging, some kind of proof of whatever they're saying that you're asking about, so that you can say, no, this is what I was told and this is what I rely upon if it comes up in the future and there's a dispute about it. So
yes, follow up, say, based on our conversation on January 5th, 2021, this is what I understood, blah, 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 blah. All the points out, and let them respond and say yay or nay. Yeah. Yep. Okay. This has been awesome. I don't have anything else that I think I missed, even though I was all over the place. But I think this was a good discussion, and I hope that it's going to be helpful to somebody who's out there who is not sure how student loans work, or who has student loans and trying to understand what it is that you're looking at when you go to Nelnet or any of these servicers. And there are a lot of servicers that are going out of business. They are, because they did not service the loans the way they should. Stay on top of your student loan. Go to those websites. If you see something that doesn't make sense, call and call again and write it down and make a note and say, follow up with emails, whatever you need to do, because it's your money, it's your life. And if you don't take charge of it, they don't care. Okay. So I think that's it. And then again, don't forget, next week, join me at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time at the same place, where we're going to be talking with a Kyle, who was forgiven over $200,000+ in the public service loan forgiveness program. So immediately he got a net worth increase. So that's what we want. We want a net worth increase. So join me next Sunday. Tell anybody that you know who has student loans, who's thinking about going into the public service loan forgiveness, whether they're a teacher, I think nurses, qualify. And I know if you work with some sectors of the government, they qualify. So if you know anybody, please tell them to come, and you're going to learn about the process that he took to guarantee, and he started it in college. He didn't just start when he graduated, he started in college to guarantee that he would have his loans forgiven. Okay. Thank you so much again, Larita.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, everyone who stayed around and who visited while we talk student loans. I'm going to put some chapter markers on the video so you can jump to the part that interests you. And please share and tell somebody about this conversation, because it is needed. Thank you, and I'll see you next Sunday.
Bye.